The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Another one goes down as a result of the Trump-Russia investigation, and this time it is hitting very, very much closer to Donald Trump himself, because Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, has agreed to plead guilty to 8 different counts. And these are charges that he was facing in the Southern District of New York. He has reached a plea agreement with prosecutors. It will include guilty pleas for multiple crimes, 8 counts total, and he has surrendered to the FBI in New York City. He is in custody. The charges against him could carry prison time, potentially 3 to 5 years, although you really just don't know. Paul Manafort also convicted, and we'll talk about his possible prison time a little bit later on in the program. Here is Michael Cohen leaving the courthouse yesterday on what has been, I would argue, the worst day so far for the presidency of Donald Trump, August 21st, 2018. 16 total guilty charges against insiders to the Trump campaign. Michael Cohen leaving the courthouse to chance of lock him up. These are charges for tax fraud, campaign finance violations, and those campaign finance violations appear to be specifically related to payments made to mistresses of the candidate in order for them not to talk. Now, he doesn't name Donald Trump, but everything we know about Michael Cohen so far is that his only candidate client has been Donald Trump. Supposedly, he only had 3 clients, period, for who knows how long, one of whom was Sean Hannity. Third one, I don't remember exactly who that was. But we are talking here about criminality, pleading guilty to criminality connected to payments made to silence mistresses of Donald Trump, most likely Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. So these charges are not only serious, but these are charges related to actions during and related to the Donald Trump campaign. This is not stuff people did years ago, although at this point it has actually been a couple years. It's no longer people who have nothing to do with Trump. This is one of Trump's closest confidants. He was for years, and these are actions that he took while he was working for the Trump campaign, I guess is the least grammatically ambiguous way of saying it. What we don't yet know is whether Cohen is fully cooperating here. Sometimes plea deals are part of a deal to fully cooperate and to truly turn on whoever it is you've got dirt on. We don't know. We know that he seemed to be saying he was going to do what was best for his family. These trials can be very expensive. According to Politico, a source close to Cohen says he agreed to this not necessarily because he's fully turning on Trump, but because he's trying to save millions of dollars that it would likely cost to fight this all the way to the end and also to limit his exposure. One question is whether the campaign finance charges related to what we now know are Trump's mistresses, how involved was Trump directly with those payments? Trump denied any involvement. Cohen is now saying he was directed by, quote, the candidate on that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The attorney for Stormy Daniels, Michael Avenatti, says this is very good for them. He went to Twitter immediately and said, quote, the developments of today will permit us to have the stay lifted in the civil case. Remember, he has a civil case here going as well, and should also permit us to proceed with an expedited deposition of Trump under oath about what he knew, when he knew it, and what he did about it. We will disclose it all to the public. Michael Cohen also has some interesting tweets in his past that relate to the developments of the last 24 hours. You might remember that Michael Cohen tweeted back in December of 2015, Hillary Clinton, when you go to prison for defrauding America and perjury, your room and board will be free. That tweet not aging well for Michael Cohen. So what is next? Number one, I anticipate Rudy Giuliani appearing on Fox News or telling George Stephanopoulos that guilt is now a relative term. Okay, yeah, guilty, but what does guilty even really mean? Crime is a total sociocultural construction. Even defining what a crime is a completely arbitrary. Maybe even the fact that Cohen pleads guilty exonerates Trump in the mind of Rudy Giuliani.
The truth isn't the truth. Guilty isn't guilty. Crimes aren't crimes.
Nothing
like
is anything.
Now.
Nothing is anything at this point. So let's summarize. Donald Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, pleaded guilty. Donald Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty. Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, likely heading to prison, found guilty on 8 of 18 counts yesterday. We'll talk about that later. Trump's foreign policy advisor, George Papadopoulos, pleaded guilty, and the list is going to keep getting longer. We have a poll up at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show/community asking you, who do you think is going to be the next to be indicted in the Trump fiasco? And we will get those results to you by the end of the week. In order to continue draining the swamp, Donald Trump will likely react to news of Cohen pleading guilty by stripping the security clearance of some former intelligence chief, because they're really the risk to this country, right? And of course, if there's nothing to see here, why do Trump associates keep pleading guilty? And I'm convinced that if Cohen does truly cooperate, if Cohen really says, I'm going to give them everything I have, it's going to be bad for the Trump family. And I know that as a sitting president, Trump can't be indicted, but a lot of people in his family can. And Donald Trump Jr., one of the folks at the top of that list of exposure.
I feel like to some, maybe this story would be a little bit off-putting because Cohen's guilty plea isn't directly related to the Russia stuff, right? It has to do with campaign finance violations and is connected to affairs and that sort of thing, like hush payments. So some people may not like it. Maybe they would think it's like a witch hunt. But hey, the guy broke the law. You can't break the law.
Some people might consider it to be a witch hunt. Yeah, I don't know who you're thinking about there. And now I saved this part for the end because this is just huge. This is maybe the biggest part of the story as it relates to Trump. Michael Cohen is saying that the campaign finance violations related to the payments he made to those mistresses were payments specifically requested by the candidate, who we all know is Donald Trump. And that's what I want to discuss next with you. We now have August 21st, August 22nd, 2018, a direct allegation of criminal wrongdoing by Donald Trump from an indicted party who would know exactly what it was that Trump didn't do in the Trump-Russia investigation. As we just have discussed, Michael Cohen, Trump's personal lawyer, has pleaded guilty to 8 counts. Some of those counts are for campaign finance violations related to hush money paid to the mistresses of the candidate, who we can say is Donald Trump. Initially, Trump said he had no idea about any of this stuff. Payments, hush money, Stormy Daniels, 130 grand. I don't know anything about it. That quickly fell apart as a lie. And now the big revelation is that Michael Cohen alleges the hush money payments for which he was convicted, for which he pled guilty, were specifically directed, specifically requested of him by Donald Trump himself. This directly ties Donald Trump to criminality for which Michael Cohen has pleaded guilty. Michael Cohen is stating in no uncertain terms that the illegal payments he made were, quote, at the direction of the candidate, meaning Donald Trump. Cohen told this to a judge in a district court in New York City yesterday. He said that the hush money payments were not only made as directed by Trump, but that they were made as directed by Trump specifically for the, quote, principal purpose of influencing the election. The question immediately becomes, can Cohen prove this, or will it be an allegation that can't be substantiated? We know Cohen is an evidence hoarder. Millions of documents were seized during the course of the investigation when the FBI raided his hotel room and his office and his condo, all sorts of places. So it is very reasonable to think that Cohen may have actual evidence tying Trump to those requests. In colloquial terms, aside from whether it can be proven in a court of law, this allegation from Cohen likely means that Trump is also guilty of campaign finance fraud or illegality, period. So now let's discuss, how might we get information about this? How might it be proven that Donald Trump indeed committed the same crimes that Michael Cohen committed? Well, Michael Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, appeared on MSNBC last night. You might recognize that name because Lanny Davis is a longtime Clinton friend of both Bill and Hillary Clintons. He is Michael Cohen's lawyer, and he says in very clear terms that Cohen knows and is willing to talk about Trump collusion with Russia. Take a listen to this.
I can't tell you the answer to that question about contacts between Michael and the special counsel, but I can tell you that Mr. Cohen has knowledge on certain subjects that should be of interest to the special counsel and is more than happy to tell the special counsel the obvious possibility of a conspiracy to collude and corrupt the American democracy system in the 2016 election, which the Trump Tower meeting was all about, but also knowledge about the computer crime of hacking and whether or not Mr. Trump knew ahead of time about that crime and even cheered it on. And we know he publicly cheered it on.
Knowledge of hacking and attempts to collude specifically about Donald Trump is what Lanny Davis is saying his client Michael Cohen has. Lanny Davis also said that Michael Cohen testified under oath that Trump directed him to commit a crime. That is a major development in this case. If we believe Lanny Davis, okay, and so far, Lanny Davis has been truthful to the extent we've been able to corroborate or just wait and see when he says something, does it end up happening? If Lanny Davis is accurate here, this is about to completely explode. And this is terrifying, not only because of the level to which our government at the top appears to have been co-opted and compromised. That should be scary to everybody. But this is also really scary and horrifying because a huge portion of the voting public, the people who voted for Trump in 2016, the people who are about to vote in the midterms, which we've been talking about for months at this point, many of them don't know that this is going on. And many of the ones that do don't have the belief that this is actually accurate reporting. They've been conditioned successfully by Donald Trump to hear about 8 indictments and 8 guilty and this and that, and Lanny Davis and Trump knows Cohen has this and that on Trump. They've been conditioned to reflexively think it's fake news when they hear this stuff. As far as what Trump is thinking, since tweeting pictures from a rally last night like nothing is going on, he's actually been kind of quiet on Twitter. And Trump tends to go sort of quiet when he realizes that there's kind of nothing he can really say, although he did later say something along the lines of Paul Manafort is still a good guy. Right. And I think it's clearly signaling that Paul Manafort is going to be pardoned at some point. But back to Cohen. If what Cohen's lawyer is intimating here is true, these would rise to impeachable offenses against the President of the United States. And the only question that then remains is, will the House and Senate act? And the answer, sadly, is unless Republicans lose in November, the answer is a definitive and unequivocal no. Republicans aren't going to act on impeachment unless we get out there and vote in November. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We've still got the entire Paul Manafort indictment and verdict to talk about next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Robert Diaz. Membership is the #1 funding source for the David Pakman Show. Membership and Patreon together are by far the biggest sources of funding for the show because we are funded by the audience. Thanks to Robert for being today's new member of the day. Also, big shout out to Jay Luna, who is our sustaining member of the day. He's been with us since 2013. Join Robert and Jay at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code is available, vote soon 18, if you would like 40% off. By all means, have at it. And remember, you can make a pledge of as little as $1 a month. And please don't think that because you can only pledge $1 that it's not worth anything, because a lot of people pledge $1 a month, and that does add up. You can go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Make those pledges. All amounts more than welcome. It is time for Hatriot Mail. What is Hatriot Mail? This is Hatriot Mail.
Because it's time to make America hate again. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
This week's Hatriot Mail, unlike some, but like some others, doesn't really need an introduction. It is rife with some of the worst, actually, grammar and spelling we've ever seen, which says a lot when it comes to Hatriot Mail, and also really bad arguments that aren't even really arguments, they're just ad hominems. Take a listen.
You're a fool. So is your show. You're another loser who is jealous of this wealthy man Trump. And the power he has now go back to your room. And stay there till I say you can come out. You child David Pakman. Go play your video game, Pakman. Another Pakman garbage presentation. This is a Jew communist propaganda.
The David Pakman Show, Jew communist propaganda. My favorite thing is saying I am jealous of Trump with a G rather than a J. Not that that's the only misspelling relative to jealous, but I am completely jealous of Trump.
I'm willing to excuse the your spelt U-R because
Absolutely.
there are two different spellings of your, and sometimes the Hatriots will get it confused.
Sure.
And UR, I think, works well for both of them, but there's no explanation for jealous. Like, you can't, explain that away.
You've never been jealous of the alpha male, Pat?
No, I mean, it sounds like maybe you could pronounce it jealous, but then it would be more like jelly-like, not the actual word that we know for jealous.
Exactly. And of course, gelatin, not vegetarian, certainly not vegan, and that would not be tolerated by producer Pat, no matter who the Hatriot thinks they are. So I think in all ways and in every way, this is one of the best Hatriot mails we've ever had. And to celebrate that, we are offering you the coupon code HATRIOT40. If you go to www.joinpakman.com, you pick any membership, doesn't matter which one. You realize it's time to support the David Pakman Show. I'm going to counteract the hate and the Hatriots by becoming a member. If you type in the coupon code HATRIOT40, you save 40% and 115 Hatriots cry. And that is a really great thing for progressive media. Okay. We've got to talk now about Paul Manafort. At the beginning of the show, we talked about the 8 guilty pleas from Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen. And we are continuing coverage of August 21st, 2018. Yesterday, a really bad day for Donald Trump and his sort of amalgamation of pond scum, lowlifes, and grifters that he has surrounded himself with, despite the claim that he was going to put the best people around him. It is not only Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, who pleaded guilty to 8 counts, but Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's campaign chairman, one of the first major indictments in Robert Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation, has been found guilty on 8 counts announced yesterday. He was actually up against 18 counts. 10 of them ended up in a mistrial with the jury unable to reach a verdict, but 8 guilty verdicts against Paul Manafort, 5 counts of tax fraud, 1 charge of hiding foreign bank accounts, and 2 counts of bank fraud. 8 total counts. The first major test of Robert Mueller's investigative team. They did the investigation. They interviewed witnesses. They recommended charges. And now they got 8 guilty verdicts in the first big trial. This is only the beginning for Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort is facing another trial next month on related but separate charges in Washington, D.C. This may only be the tip of the iceberg for Paul Manafort. Now, what will the committed, cognitively dissonant Trumpists say to defend this, to excuse it, to claim that it's no big deal? We actually already know because they've been saying it all along. They'll say the same thing that they said when the indictments were first handed down, which is these charges don't relate to Russia and Manafort's actions as campaign manager for Donald Trump. Yeah, he's got a history in Russia and he did sketchy stuff here and there. And of course, in a sense, that's true. But this is now a senior campaign official with the means and the background and the connections and the motive to help the Russians and to push for collusion with Russians and to push for the Republican Party to soften its platform on Russia, which they did on the eve of the Republican National Convention back in 2016. It was because of this guy. So you have to take it a step at a time. Despite Trump and his cronies claiming that the investigation is almost over, it actually seems to be ramping up. If anything, they've been saying it's almost over for like a year now, yet we keep getting more indictments and guilty pleas. You need to prepare yourselves not only for them to say this is very clearly the end and it's not going to go any further. You need to prepare yourselves for headlines on right-wing media like judge declares mistrial in Paul Manafort trial, ignoring that there were 8 guilty verdicts. Or another possible right-wing headline, is it time to investigate Hillary Clinton's ties to Paul Manafort. And I'm kind of joking, but then this morning I looked at the FoxNews.com headlines, and you see that the big story is the monster down the road, an illegal immigrant arrested in the murder of Molly Tibbetts, who was a local farmhand. You see a story called A Latte Nerve about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lamenting a cafe's closure over wage hikes that she backs. And then you do see this very small story that has a picture of Paul Manafort and of Michael Cohen, which says triple threat to GOP, storm clouds gather for GOP, but midterm surprises lurk. The one reference to the fact that Trump's personal lawyer and campaign manager were together found guilty and pled guilty to 16 different crimes was that despite this, there could still be some surprises for the Republican Party in November of 2018.
Yeah, so it's no surprise that Trump supporters are just going to ignore this and right-wing media is just going to ignore this. But oddly enough, Trump tweeted about it twice yesterday. And I don't know why he's doing that. Maybe because he could end up pardoning Paul Manafort or because he understands that Manafort has stuff on Trump and they want to stay a part of the same team so Manafort doesn't flip on him, maybe?
Signaling that just hold tight and I'll eventually pardon you. Yeah, we also have a screenshot from, is it Breitbart, Pat?
Yep.
Breitbart this morning. The big story, Tom Cotton, Republican Senator Tom Cotton, saying that Molly Tibbetts would be alive if the immigration laws were seriously enforced, and a bunch of other stories. And it's almost like nothing really happened yesterday, even though August 21st was the worst day for the Trump administration in the entire time that it has existed as an administration. A lot of other big stories, apparently, that Fox chose to cover and Breitbart chose to cover. Potential prison time. Okay. Potential being the key word. There are people saying Paul Manafort is facing 80 years. There are people saying Paul Manafort is facing 240 years, if you count it in a different way. Actual legal experts are saying the more likely sentence would be in the range of 7 to 10 years in prison. And of course, Trump pardons can change it all. And there is increasingly a very good chance, I believe, that Donald Trump is going to pardon Manafort. I think he's signaling it on Twitter already by saying he's a good guy and this was all unfair.
Yeah, and Paul Manafort's 69 years old. I don't think he's going to make it another 240 years.
Probably not.
He's going to look for a way out.
Let's discuss Robert Mueller's investigation bigger picture. Number one, it's a victory for Mueller, okay? The investigation he is running is coming up not only with charges, because just coming up with charges can happen without them being charges that can be proven. The charges are sticking, and the charges are getting guilty verdicts, both from juries, and they are also getting guilty pleas from people like Michael Cohen and George Papadopoulos. That's already a big deal. Second, Mueller's claims of biased behavior are falling flat. The closest that the right got was Peter Strzok, who was caught texting anti-Trump things. Mueller immediately dismissed him from the investigation, and Strzok has since been fired by the FBI. So despite all of the smear attempts that are happening by the Trumpists on the right to discredit Robert Mueller, he's run the investigation very, very well. There's no demonstrable bias that has been shown. And most importantly, the charges are sticking and turning to guilty verdicts, which is always the question when you've got such a massive and highly explosive and politically biased perspective on a trial like this. Meanwhile, Trump is stating again, he definitely didn't use the N-word around Omarosa, and the NFL players should really stand during the national anthem. I'm kidding, but full distraction mode, even doing like a presidential rally yesterday. This is not getting better. It's getting worse, and I will actually be answering questions about what's going on with the investigation on the show's Instagram account later on. If you're not following the show on Instagram, what are you doing with your day? I don't even know. Follow the show at David Pakman Show on Instagram, and also follow me at david.pakman, both on Instagram. Quick break. After the break, I will be speaking to, this is going to be very exciting, Pat, I will be speaking to a former Trump voter who has now turned on Trump, went on CNN and said, I don't support Trump anymore, and started receiving death threats from Trumpists claiming he was a CNN plant rather than just a guy who doesn't support Trump anymore. Jeremy Montanez is going to join me after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We've got something interesting for you today. I am joined now by Jeremy Montanez, who is a former Trump supporter who was actually featured on a panel on CNN's New Day on August 7th. And on that panel, Jeremy explained why he at one point did support Donald Trump, but since is no longer a supporter of Trump's. And since then, he has been accused of being a plant by the so-called fake news CNN and has even received death threats from followers of the president. So, Jeremy, first of all, thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So let's first just figure out, how did CNN find you in order to invite you to this panel of former and current Trump supporters?
They found me on Facebook. According to them, I had posted something a while back that stood out to them as being a former Trump supporter. I have no idea what it was that they saw, but they wanted 3 or 6 people on a panel, 3 that support him, 3 that used to support him. But as I felt it, I felt like I was the only one there that actually did not support him.
Okay, and when they contacted you, did they say anything about the specifics of what you would be expected to say? Were you coached in any way, or was it basically the premise is you are a former Trump supporter and you'll participate on a panel?
Just the premises that I was a former Trump supporter and I would participate on the panel. There was no training, coaching involved.
And were you paid for the appearance?
I was not.
Okay, good. So you show up at this panel and the questions are relatively unremarkable. The people that still support Trump are asked, why do you support Trump? What do you like about him?
Right.
What's he doing that's good? You were
Right.
asked about other elements and opinions of why you used to support Trump and why you no longer do. Did anything about the dynamics of the entire panel feel concerning to you, inauthentic, or did it seem as though everybody on the panel was just giving their genuine thoughts and feelings?
I feel that they gave their genuine thoughts and feelings, which was actually kind of frightening, just because of the mentality that these supporters have and what lengths they go to believe what, I consider their false news and their fake news. And it was very hard for me to express my own opinions when you're surrounded by basically 5 Trump supporters, because they're constantly cutting you off. And I made it a point not to do that to any of them.
So after the panel, you start receiving all sorts of criticism, including that you were a plant and death threats. Through what means were most of the messages coming? Was it through social media? Did people find your phone number? Were people showing up at your house?
It started on YouTube right away, because CNN had come out with a headline on their website that specifically said former Trump supporter calls president monster, which is, I did call him a monster. And it went on to YouTube, and I started getting the defamation there, being called a CNN plant, an actor, a crisis actor. Basically what David Hogg was going through is what they started doing to me and continue to do to me. And then I was starting to get death threats on there, which a lot of them have been removed, thank goodness. But as far as getting personal death threats, I received a few sent to me by my own email, yes. No phone calls, though.
Okay, so what state do you live in, and did you vote in, and sort of what have been your political beliefs for, the pre-Trump era?
I've always been an ultra-liberal Democrat. I live in the state of California, and the reason why, you're probably wondering, did I vote for him in the first place? Yeah. Is because I couldn't get myself to vote for Hillary Clinton. I'm going to be honest about that. At the time, I looked at her as a status quo candidate. I looked at her as just being a moderate candidate. I wanted somebody that was more for the people. I looked at her as a criminal, as being a criminal. And I just thought voting for a non-politician might be the best bet. And it turns out it was the biggest mistake I've ever made.
That's interesting. So you saw Trump, this New York City billionaire, as a guy who was more for the people than Hillary Clinton.
When he spoke, I felt that he spoke to the average citizen, because he didn't speak in this, I guess you could say, prim and proper manner. I don't know. I think it's more also because this was probably the worst, set of candidates we've ever had, especially in my lifetime. So it was a very, very, difficult choice to make. But what's funny is that, back then I used to think to myself, well, I don't want to ever have to say voted for Hillary Clinton. Now, if you're talking to me and you ask me the same question, it's the biggest mistake I've ever made, and I can't go back on that.
Were there any issues? So a lot of what you're talking is about sort of the dynamics, how Trump spoke versus how Hillary Clinton spoke, and the sort of feeling of whether one is more or less for the people, as you said. As a liberal Democrat, did you agree with Trump on any issues?
I knew going into it that he was basically spouting out racism and whatnot. Now, I'm actually I'm Hispanic. I grew up in Mexico for half of my life. But I thought that once he would come into office, he would change his tune. I thought that he was trying to just win a base over and that he just wanted certain votes. And I did, honestly, I can't think of, there were some interviews I saw him say where he wants to give, health care, make it for everybody and stuff like that. So yeah, those issues I did agree with because I believe in universal health care. I did not 1 minute think that it would become the nightmare that it's become having him in office.
But wait a second, Jared, so you thought Trump wanted universal health care?
He said in some interviews that I saw that he was going to change Obamacare, but he was going to make it to where, everybody's going to have something great. Everybody's going to have a great plan, and that struck out to me because universal health care is actually my main issue. And then it just went down to the fact that, if I want to be really honest about this, I can say that it could have been more of an anti-Hillary vote. But I didn't start my what's the word? Regret for voting for him entirely until he started doing what he was doing on the southern border. That's what did it for me.
So once as you mentioned, you grew up part of your life in Mexico and you're Hispanic.
I did.
Once it got to that point, that's when you started to regret your vote.
Yes.
And what was it about that?
He's tearing kids away from parents. I mean, how inhumane can you get? At no fault of their own. These kids, the Fox News and the, Trump minions want you to believe that these kids didn't come with their parents and whatnot. I think that's nonsense. I mean, maybe some didn't, but that doesn't give them any right to shove kids in cages and separate them from, it's inhumane. I can't believe that this country has come to that, It reminds me of concentration camps. It reminds me of what they did to the Japanese during World War II. And not only that, but his racism is just off the chain. Even with Puerto Rico, that's an island that's owned by the USA. After that hurricane, he called them whiners, said that they need to help themselves. Had they not had brown skin and had it been a white island, would he have helped them? I truly believe he would have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I guess what I'm trying to figure out and what I find interesting here is, well, let me couch my next question with this first question. How closely would you say you followed the election up to November of 2016? Like, would you say you followed the election very closely or casually or not very closly?
I followed it closely. I was originally for Bernie Sanders, and then once Clinton basically rigged the primary against him, and got the nomination, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
That's when I started looking more at Trump and watching his interviews and watching his speeches. And he just seemed like a strong president. He had a strong presidential presence at that time, but a lot of his stuff has been vulgar. I'm never going to deny that.
I guess what I was kind of thinking, you said that the things that kind of the straws that broke the camel's back, for lack of a better term, were the reaction to Puerto Rico and then also what's going on at the southern border. Trump said during the campaign, Mexico's not sending our best. They're sending rapists and criminals, and some I assume are good people. He said he wanted to ban Muslim immigration to the United States. I guess as someone who says you followed the election closely, I'm surprised that the straw that broke the camel's back was something that we saw the entire campaign,
Right. Yeah. And when it came, when he made his presidential announcement, you have to understand, I wasn't for voting for him until way into the campaign, maybe 2 months before the election even happened. And, I live with pro-Trump, people, in my own home who kind of convinced me to just give him a shot, give him a chance, see what he does. And I believe in that. I believe in giving people chances and seeing if they're going to, do something good.
But why didn't you apply that same thing to Hillary Clinton, right? Because you had some skepticism of Hillary Clinton, but at least on paper, her views were closer to yours. What about giving her a chance, right? I guess I'm trying to understand how, as you and I both supported Bernie Sanders originally.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how your openness to giving people a chance ended up with you voting for the guy whose beliefs were the furthest from yours?
I think it's because of how just like angry I was at the Democratic Party for snubbing Bernie. And I think that, you know, it was more of, some people have asked me, you know, when it all said and done, would you say that this was an anti-Hillary vote? Yeah, I would say that it was. But I did at least give him a chance up to a point, because I've always said that I don't like him as a person. I never cared for. I've never thought that he was a good person, but I wanted to see, you know, how he might be doing as a president, because we've had plenty of presidents that weren't good people, but that ran the country pretty well.
But again, if your complaint was that Hillary didn't seem to you, I guess to say she wasn't a good person, she didn't seem for the people, you would think that applying the exact same logic you did to Trump, which is it doesn't matter whether she's a good person or not, she might do good things and let's give people a chance. I'm still just confused how you got to the vote you got to.
I just didn't like her. I mean, that's, you know, I mean, that's what it boils down to. I just don't like her. It's the same thing in 2008. I didn't vote for Barack Obama. I didn't think that, you know, I thought he was arrogant. I thought that he talked down to people, but I did vote for him in 2012.
Who'd you vote for in 08?
Ralph Nader.
Okay. Well, so what about applying that approach in 2016? Why not vote for Jill Stein, for example, or Gary Johnson, if the idea was not to support Hillary Clinton?
Good question. Good question. I mean, now that I think back to it, I just think that I should have sat the election out, or not voted for anybody. But I'm not like that, though. I'm not the kind of person that doesn't vote. You know, I believe in voting. I believe that it's our voice and it's our right to do that.
Let me ask you this, as you know, there was talk during the election after Bernie Sanders did not get the Democratic nomination. There was talk of a significant voting bloc that were Bernie supporters who would end up voting for Trump. Mathematically, it was not a common thing, but you actually did it, right? Do you know other Bernie supporters in California that ended up voting for Trump?
Yes.
You do?
Actually, yes.
And what was their reasoning for doing that?
Anti-Hillary vote.
It was anger with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, it was anybody but Hillary. Yeah.
Was it more anger with Hillary or more anger with the DNC?
I think both. Debbie Schultz, and just the whole thing. It was just a big mess. As far as people's feelings, because they, people like myself. I mean, I really felt like a person that could have been the greatest president in my lifetime, that could have actually helped people like me. And when I say that, I'm talking about, people that aren't rich and whatnot. I mean, really could have made a change, and a very positive change. And I think that just people were just sick of it. They were just tired of, every 4 years we get the same kind of garbage on the White House, and we really wanted something different. We wanted real progressive change.
Wow. Jeremy, after the CNN panel, what was the dynamic like with the other participants, most of whom are still supporters of Trump? Did they say anything to you? Were they angry with you, or was it cordial?
No. We got along excellent after, behind the scenes, we became good friends from the day that we were in New York. We hung out afterwards, and we had a really good time. Everybody went their separate ways in the end. There was no arguing. There was no fighting. So it was cordial. I enjoyed myself.
Well, the death threats are absolutely horrible. Are you, I mean, I don't want you saying more than you're comfortable, but are there some that you feel need to be taken seriously? Are you sort of taking action about some of this stuff?
Yes. There was one that was sent to me the day that I did the interview for Univision, Univision. And I took that one very seriously. I made a police report on that, and the PD over in my city, did everything they could. They came over and, got my information. I gave them a copy of the email, and, we just went from there. I mean, they told me to not be too frightened, because it's not frequent that I'm getting personalized emails sent to me like that. But they actually said, I wish I knew where you live, so I could, I'd kill you myself. Wow. And that was frightening.
Wow. We have been speaking with Jeremy Montanez, who is a former Bernie supporter who voted for Trump, regrets the vote, and then was called a CNN plant for merely stating that that is now a vote that he regrets. Quite a situation we find ourselves in 2018, Jeremy. Really
Yes.
appreciate you talking to me today and telling me the entire story.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the opportunity and the honor.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This is just the best. I think you're going to like this one. For all of the attacks on the infamous Trump-Russia dossier by Christopher Steele, Steele has now come out on top in a libel case against him in court. Trump claimed the entire dossier was fake. His defenders claimed it was just made-up lies, and it has now been upheld as at least not libelous or defamatory in a court of law. Christopher Steele is a former MI6 officer, the UK's intelligence service, and he won a case in the United States against 3 Russian oligarchs who sued him because the oligarchs said the stuff that Christopher Steele put in the Trump-Russia dossier about them, about us, they said, was untrue, it's defamatory, it's libelous. And the court decided that no, that's not the case. Christopher Steele said that the case should be thrown out, and a judge agreed. The judge didn't decide, are the contents accurate line by line? Are they true or untrue? But what the judge did decide was that the document, the Steele dossier, was not deliberately inaccurate, which is the standard that's applied to what Steele put in it when you're trying to figure out whether it's defamatory or libelous. So this tells us that as far as a judge is concerned, whether or not every claim in the dossier is true, it's not a dossier put together with unsourced, knowingly false material like Christopher Steele. It contains claims of varying specificity. You could argue it contains claims of varying accuracy because it's a report of what Steele's sources told him, but it was put together in a way that a court decided is simply not defamatory. Now, the Russian oligarchs aren't pleased. They said they would, quote, almost certainly appeal the court's decision. It's not hugely likely that it would go a different way on appeal, and Steele is still up against libel charges in the UK. There's another Russian named Alexei Gubarev who's named in the dossier, and he's going to have to deal with that in the UK. But this is yet another good result, I would say, for the dossier. Now, Trumpists will hear me and they'll say, David, this doesn't prove the accuracy of anything in the dossier. And that's true. I'm not trying to hide that. Much of the dossier has been separately corroborated. But what this decision does mean is that the allegations about the Russians who sued Steele are beyond libel. It's a win for the legitimacy of elements of the dossier as genuine reports of what people told Steele. And I feel like that's what's missing from the conversation, Pat. People say Steele made this stuff up, or Steele's not trustworthy, or he concocted this stuff or not, and we need to punish Steele for making things up. Steele never claimed that these were his assertions. What Christopher Steele did is he gathered information from sources about Donald Trump, who was orchestrating that and who wanted the document put together. People like to debate that. He was not just writing stuff down. He was documenting the claims made about Donald Trump. It was not a document where Steele purported to adjudicate what was true and what wasn't true. And hopefully that gets figured out as cases are decided that they are not defamatory on that basis.
Yeah, I feel like the claims made by Steele seemed just so outrageous when they were first released.
Yeah.
Because, you know, this was their first time looking at these allegations. And people, that just kind of stuck with people, right? That there's no way that the Trump PP tape exists and that all of the Trump associates were this involved in Russia.
Yeah.
And you know, it's kind of hard to come back from that in a way.
And when we actually look at the reality that more and more elements of the dossier have been independently corroborated over time, we now have Michael Cohen, who supposedly had nothing to do with anything. He has now pled guilty to 8 counts, although not directly related to the contents of the dossier. But it's all now fitting together. So it's really important that you not fall for Trumpists saying it's meaningless because it doesn't prove the truth of the claims in the dossier. The story is that the people that were claiming that what Steele wrote about them was defamatory were able to present no evidence that the contents were untrue, and certainly not that the contents were defamatory, and the judge threw the case out. So it's definitely not phony. It's definitely not been discredited as, what was it that Carter Page called it on the show? The dodgy dossier.
The dodgy dossier.
What we have is a list of assertions, more of which have been independently corroborated now than at any previous time. And I think it would actually be very interesting to go back to the dossier and go through it point by point now, pulling out the parts that have been separately corroborated. At this point, it's quite a few, and that might actually be useful for the audience to see us do. And maybe we will do that sometime soon. The Washington Post has learned that in the context of working to fight fake and propaganda news, Facebook has developed a reputation score between 0 and 1, which applies to individual users, a 1 being very trustworthy and a 0 being completely untrustworthy. Facebook has actually been developing this for about a year, and it's an interesting angle on the entire fighting fake news thing, and you can just focus on news sources if you are Facebook. You can say, we as a platform are going to focus on articles and videos from conspiracy websites or disinformation websites. But this is another possible way to do it, which is look at the trends at the individual user level, look at what individual users are posting and what they are flagging, and then determine what is the sort of credibility rating of this user. The problem that Facebook had, completely predictably, is that once they set up a system where people could flag disinformation and fake news, users started reporting real news as fake for political reasons, and that made the entire system less useful, I guess would be the way to say it. So first of all, shock. It's not uncommon that people would say something is fake news merely because they don't like it. That's kind of the entire use of fake news by Trumpists. So now what Facebook is doing is they are using this trustworthiness score as a sort of conduit to a bigger algorithm that evaluates users and the news that's being posted. What exactly contributes to a higher or lower trustworthiness score on Facebook? We don't exactly know. The system is opaque by definition, and partially I would guess that's to prevent people from gaming the system in the ways that they'd be able to if they knew exactly what behaviors Facebook is looking for. YouTube is similar. YouTube has changed their algorithm over time in terms of what's the best way to title videos, what's the best way to what the best time to post videos or to tag videos, and they never are completely direct about exactly what the strategy is because they don't want people to game it or to unfairly take advantage of it. Now, the concerns around this are obvious. Number one, do we like the idea of a platform like Facebook deciding how to rank users' credibility and thus using that credibility ranking to impact people's algorithms? If Facebook determines that a set of users is not credible or trustworthy, they may make it so that the articles those people post are less likely to be shown to their friends. This is good if the algorithm is accurate, but should we be concerned about the fact that they determine what the algorithm is? It's sort of like if there's a government you like, you might be okay with the government saying these are the good media outlets and these are the bad ones. But once you consider the fact that as soon as it's a government you don't like, you might not like their decisions, I very quickly get to, I don't want the government determining what are the real news and fake news outlets. I think that's dangerous. Is it just as dangerous for Facebook to be effectively doing the same thing, both with news outlets and individual users?
I think you can argue that it is. I just wish this wasn't necessary to begin with. I think conventionally wisdom used to be that if you give people real and fake news, they can determine what's what. They can tell what the truth is. But we learned from the 2016 election cycle that that's not always the case.
It's not always the case, and sometimes it's deliberately obfuscated because people will, knowing that something may not be accurate, they will push it as accurate for political reasons, or knowing that something is accurate, they will denounce it and flag it as fake, again, for political reasons. The bigger questions I have about this are, number one, is Facebook doing this in a partisan or fair way? Neither would be illegal, right? I mean, Facebook could do this in a fair way or in an unfair way. legally there's no problem with what they're doing. They can completely do this as a company that has guidelines in terms of service. That's one question.
Well, hey, as of now, as the law is written now.
That's as the law is written now. But number two, what is the bigger picture of how this is being used? If users that are less trustworthy are going to have their content deprioritized in their friends' news feeds, for example, are we comfortable with that? And most importantly, I know we say this a lot, Facebook can do whatever they want if it's not against the law, and this isn't against the law right now. There are some people, like earlier this week, I interviewed TJ Kirk, known as the Amazing Atheist. He wants platforms like Facebook to be regulated as if they have a government-level responsibility to free speech guidelines. Right now, the law doesn't say that, and Facebook also doesn't have to even make the process transparent to users. We might want that process to be less opaque, more transparent, but they don't have to do that. So right now, if you don't like it, what you can do is get off of Facebook, and actually, people are doing this. One I recently read, and we interviewed him, Antonio Garcia Martinez's book about Facebook. And one of the issues is drastically reduced user acquisition and even some abandonment. And this, if people don't like it, they can leave Facebook, and some people are.
Part of that has to do with the fake news stuff, but also maybe it's just going out of style. Like, I feel like these social media platforms have a short lifespan, and Facebook's been around since, what, 2006, 2007?
It's outlived MySpace, that's for sure.
That's for sure. But maybe it's going out, maybe it's going the way of the dodo bird, and Snapchat and Instagram are where it's at now.
Is MySpace the model for the future of Facebook? I don't know. I guess we will wait and see. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail about someone who just seems to be really confused. I don't know what this caller is talking about. Take a listen.
David Packman, I'm a new caller. I'm calling from California. I'm a homeless guy, so I have nothing to do but watch YouTube. But you've quickly become one of my favorite. But I'm disappointed for what I just saw about Penn Jillette confirms Trump's wildly racist comments. Sounded like you just set up the idea of protecting your own show by giving the impression if the Trump tapes come up, you're also not going to talk about it.
I don't know what I have ever said to suggest that if the Trump tapes are released, I'm not going to talk about them. And I don't think there is anything people could even point to that suggests I would ignore that. Of course we would cover that.
No, I mean, maybe...
And by the way,
yeah.
Are they talking about the P tapes or tapes of him directing Michael Cohen to pay off? I don't even know what tapes he's talking about, but I would talk about any relevant tapes that come out.
I feel like it would be like the Omarosa N-word tapes. That's just my sense on this.
The N-word tapes.
Maybe you said that it would just be a distraction from all the stuff that's going on in the Trump White House.
Okay.
But we would still talk about it, even if it is a distraction. That would still be major news.
It would be major news. It would be a distraction insofar as it doesn't seem Trump's voters would care if he was throwing around the N-word. But no, I would not suppress that. I would talk about it on the program. We have a great bonus show for you today. We'll talk about Elizabeth Warren. We will talk about Mexico, a city that has legalized public sex. We will also talk about Trump saying Bill de Blasio, New York City mayor, has no imagination after they use similar slogans. Trump criticizing others for lack of creativity is an interesting one. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Get access as a member or as a patron at joinpacman.com or patreon.com/DavidPacman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.